I try to get this guy to come out today. One of these days, he'll rise with the rest of them. What's up, guys? It's your boy Chrysalis here, and today we are going to be continuing our series, Road to the Oscars 2025, where if you haven't watched the last several million videos, I'm covering every movie that's nominated for the 97th Academy Awards, specifically for Best Picture, and now we are going to cover Nickel Boys. Nickel Boys is the latest film, actually I believe the directorial feature film for filmmaker Ramil Ross. Up until this movie, Ramil Ross was best known as a documentarian about Black culture. And while I can't say I have full thorough knowledge about his past work, a lot of the themes and a lot of the culture and history appear in Nickel Boys, a movie based on the book by Colson Whitehead called The Nickel Boys. Said book based on the real-life atrocities that occurred at a juvenile institution in Florida called the Florida School for Boys, also known as Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, where a lot of atrocities against Black youth were committed there. So while a lot of what is depicted in Nickel Boys is technically fictional, the source material that it comes from isn't. It's needless to say that movies like this, while brutal, and I'm surprised that this got a PG-13 rating, while they're brutal, they also are necessary. It is necessary that movies like this are made so that way the present day doesn't forget about this dark part of US history. But what's interesting about this film isn't just the fact that it is a movie set during the civil rights movement, it's also just how it tells the story. What this movie does is it takes the perspective of our main character as well as a supporting character later in the film and makes it first person. So much of the story is being told from the eyes of our main character Elwood as well as another character named Turner. And not only did I think it was an interesting idea, I thought it was for the most part well done. It's a solid and visceral form of storytelling. Everything from intense one-on-one conversations, everything from physical altercations, everything from just something as simple as just laying in bed and not being able to sleep. A lot of it is just so well done, and a lot of it is emphasized very well from getting this point of view. Even moments of the story where Elwood is facing actual honest-to-God abuse, the first-person camera is definitely haunting, to say the least. What I will say, though, is that it simultaneously also works to its detriment because this is all we're getting. And even Ramil Ross, in a way, feels like it is going to have its limitations, which is why we're also getting Turner's point of view, but we don't get it that often, at least from what I recall. And even with Turner being kind of cynical and proving to be a catalyst for Elwood's ambitious, idealistic point of view, I still don't feel like we get that much from Turner, at least from my perspective anyway. And I just want to get that out of the way because that's honestly the only negative complaint or nitpicking I do have about the movie, because Nickel Boys is just fantastic. I can honestly say that there's absolutely nothing like Nickel Boys that came out in the year 2024, and more or less nothing like anything that I've watched in the last few years. It isn't my favorite movie of last year, nor is it my favorite of all the Best Picture nominees, but it's up there for sure, I will say that much. One of the things I do really want to touch down on, though, is when it's not doing the point of view of our characters, it's also doing these cutaways to scenes from Sidney Poitier films, as well as scenes from Martin Luther King Jr. speeches, as well as just excerpts of his speeches. as well as stills of the atrocities being committed at Nickel Academy. And as far as like emphasizing how evil Nickel Academy is, and by extension, Dozier Academy, the fact that we're not seeing a lot of the execution of the young men, as well as just the consistent abuse of all of them, definitely has more of a less is more approach when approaching how vile all this is. There's even points where I guess he's a dean or a headmaster. No, he's a supervisor. There's a point where he's talking to Elwood about how Elwood's, quote, keeping his nose clean, because Nickel Academy more or less has a merit system to where if you do good and are always obedient and everything, you can eventually leave. But really, they can still just keep you as free and cheap labor until you turn 18. Or, just take you out back and kill you and then bury you somewhere. But there's one scene in particular where the supervisor is talking to Elwood about how Elwood's been, quote, keeping his nose clean. And he takes the words of Martin Luther King Jr. and perverts them to where, within this context, King is saying that you are better off submitting to the cheap and manual labor because God deems that you sweep the streets instead of just aspiring for greater ambitions. When in truth, that's probably just a small piece of what Martin Luther King Jr. probably meant. And the greater context of the speech, of the sermon he said, probably said significantly more. So yeah, I did eventually end up looking up that quote about sweeping the streets from MLK. It's from a speech or a sermon about how you should take excellence in your work and not so much you were meant to be a street sweeper for the rest of your life. So yeah, that's an example of what I mean here. Probably how people take like the speech about how riots are the voice of the unheard and pervert it to like their own perspective. Because in that speech he says that we condemn riots, and then a lot of people just cut from there and say, yeah, see, you can't be rioting when you protest. That's wrong, blah, 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 blah. But when you keep listening to his speech, he talks about how as we condemn riots, we must also condemn the situations that made riots occur, as riots are the voice of the unheard. And I go off in that tangent specifically because there's a lot of, to me anyway, complex layers that definitely warrant multiple rewatches, as there seems to be a lot of parallels between Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his ambitions during the 60s, all that he accomplished, and the eventual unrealization of everything he wanted to do because his life was cut short. These parallels kind of line up with the life of our character Elwood. So much so that when Elwood, spoiler, by the way, this is a spoiler, big spoiler. If you have not watched the movie, go watch it and then come back. So much so that when Elwood meets his inevitable end, Turner, inspired by a lot of what Elwood believed in and what he also wanted to accomplish, ends up carrying on his beliefs and as well as the work that he ended up having unfinished. And then throughout the years of Turner's life, now masquerading about as Elwood, ended up bearing fruit because now, because of him, because of what Elwood wanted to accomplish, Nickel Academy is now no more, and a lot of the atrocities have been unearthed. It's also poignant to note that Elwood's martyrdom in the film, as what he tried to do is take the expose about Nickel Boys Academy and give it to a government official, is rewarded in his death. And it's also of note that his martyrdom does not end up bearing fruit until approximately 40 to 50 years later. What I definitely also want to point out is that this movie takes place from the late 60s all the way up to like the mid 2000s or so. And I don't know if Ramel Ross or the author of the original book, Colson Whitehead, meant to do this, but it definitely presents that this happened within a lifetime. A lot of the atrocities that occurred during the civil rights movement and even before the civil rights movement happened within a lifetime. As much as like the history textbooks of nowadays want to treat it as like ancient history and it's all just black and white, there's no gray about it, there's nothing to further investigate about it, this happened within a lifetime and it needs to be rectified and acknowledged. And that's more or less what makes this film a super necessary watch, not just for film in 2024, but also just in general. Because if we choose to dumb down and water down history, the more we are bound to repeat it as we are oblivious to the severity of what occurred at the time. At least that's a huge chunk of what I ended up getting out of Nickel Boys, because holy hell, it's fantastic and it deserved to be nominated for more. It also deserved a wider release. I'm not sure why Amazon, MGM, or what have you decided to just keep this in select theaters and only in select theaters. It could have done so much better. It deserved so much better. But needless to say, Nickel Boys gets 2 thumbs up for me. I apologize, but I also don't apologize for going on a big thing about the civil rights movement and just the injustices that black youths faced then and most likely now as well. But needless to say, it just definitely needed to be said, whether it's coming from me talking to you about this movie or from the movie itself, which you should definitely go watch. All the performances were phenomenal. I dug the score a lot and movie things. But yeah, if you watched Nickel Boys, what'd you think of it? Did you like this movie? Did you dislike this movie? And yeah, that's about it. The next movie we are going to cover is A Complete Unknown, so look forward to that. And by default, the one after that will be I'm Still Here, and then the series will be done. Finally. This is your boy Chrysalis here, signing off.